Before we get started, one shameless plug for Project Excite More. In here, we have solutions office hours from 1 to 3, where if you have any ideas, you can talk with mentors. So as Scott said, you're welcome to come into this room and use all of the resources we have to offer, one of them being the great Matt Shifrin we have here today. So yeah, we'll just get started. Can you just, I guess, what's your background? We know obviously a little bit now, but what got you here today?
Yeah, so I'll give you guys the 3-minute elevator pitch of sort of my career. So graduated from DU in 2009 with dual degrees in finance and economics. It was a great time to be a finance and econ major. I went out to New York, started working for a finance firm in wealth management, realized very quickly that I loved the work, but didn't really love the atmosphere or environment or the people that I was working with. So came back to Colorado, at which point I pursued a job with a company called the Jarden Corporation. So Jarden was a Fortune 500 consumer products conglomerate. They own brands like Crock-Pot, Coleman, Mr. Coffee, Sunbeam, Oster. For you guys skier snowboarders, K2, Vocal, Rossi, Marmot, Marker, Line, Ride, 5150. The list goes on and on and on. So 25,000 employees worldwide, 189 different brands. And they hired me on to be the general manager of North America for a company called Billy Boy. And Billy Boy was Germany's #1 condom brand, condom toy and lubricant brand, for over 25 years. So they had acquired this business, and through a tuck-in acquisition of some other healthcare and baby care brands, and they wanted to bring it to the U.S. I'd worked for Red Bull in college, had sort of finance background, so it was marketing and business-oriented sort of positioning. And they really said, just go for it and good luck. And so with that, I sort of translated the brand from Germany to the US, ultimately got it into national distribution in Walmart, Target, Walgreens, CVS, Duane Reade, Rite Aid, and major other retailers throughout the country. Built it into the 4th largest condom brand in the US, and #1 amongst collegiate consumers, which was pretty exciting. It was a very hard business. But so, I mean, the puns used to be endless. I mean, truly endless. It was hard, it was impossible having a legitimate conference call with anybody. But yeah, so I worked there for about 6.5 years at Jarden, at which point I was sort of hitting a ceiling in terms of the entrepreneurism that I could pursue within a major Fortune 500 conglomerate, a corporate business. So with that, it was kind of exciting times in the tech industry, and a friend of mine, actually another DU grad who I went to college with here, and we were on a bunch of team projects together. We were in Rieman's portfolio management class, which we managed and invested over $1 million of Rieman's money here, which was really cool, and we had a really interesting dynamic. His name was Kyle. And Kyle came to me and was like, look, I'm trying to raise money for a tech business idea, and it was a horrible idea. But I had said, well, I've actually got a better one. And the idea was to essentially become the Uber of outdoor services. So whether you're looking for a ski instructor, personal fitness trainer, whatever it might be. And so we started a company called Utivity. We raised $1.2 million in a seed round with essentially just a deck, a presentation, and a dream. And then we went ahead and started the business. We turned it into the largest outdoor provider network in the US with over 4,500 providers in 9 different states, which was really exciting and very, very challenging. At which point, though, the guy who really hired me into Jarden, a guy named Martin Franklin, came to me and said, what are you doing? And I was like, well, I'm doing tech. And he's like, I don't do tech, but I would love to continue doing something with you. And I was like, okay, well, that sounds cool. Let's go do that. He's like, why don't we go buy a business together? I was like, that sounds even cooler. And so from there, I really spent the time trying to analyze. This was, by the way, this was middle of 2014 now, so from 2009 to then. And I went ahead and looked at a bunch of different categories, packaged foods, consumer tech, all sorts of different businesses. And really thinking that this would be a fun side hustle with Martin Franklin. And one day I woke up and had this sort of epiphany around craft spirits. And I said, wow, this is a really interesting time in spirits. You have craft and majors, and nobody in the middle, right? So brands like Stranahan's or Breckenridge Distillery, High West, and then you have Diageo, Brown-Forman, brands like Jack Daniel's, Jim Beam, and so forth. And there are none of these really middle players. And what all of these craft spirit brands are lacking is a strong sales team to help them, sort of develop and grow fast. So I was like, look, we could buy a flagship business, capitalize it, ultimately build up a really killer infrastructure and foundation around the business, and then let's go ahead and buy and build other craft spirit brands, tequila, mezcal, vodka, all sorts of fun stuff. So he said, okay, let's go do it. So I went around and I looked at 150 businesses in the US that were independent spirit brands. I did a lot of due diligence on about 50 of them, really narrowed it down to probably like 25 investments, and then I went and looked at like 15. Of those, I took Martin to 3, and we made investments in 2. And the biggest one of which was Breckenridge Distillery. So at which point the CEO and founder, he was like, how can you help us? And I was like, well, I feel like I could be a good part-time VP of business development and everything and kind of help bridge the relationships between Martin and, help where I can. And he was like, how about COO? And I was like, okay, that's a different opportunity. So, it was really hard because Utivity was reaching sort of this point of growth and development. But I was also, my strong points are not, which I think is a really important thing to learn is, what are you good at and what are you not good at? Screwing in the light bulbs for me can be tough to a certain degree, right? I'm more of like, it takes 5 steps to accomplish a certain task and let's go. And then the people that work with me and around me are like, no, Matt, it normally takes 10 steps, but don't worry, we've got the other 5, right? So I was realizing that I was kind of hitting a ceiling with Utivity in terms of what I was able to accomplish there. So I spoke to my partners. We really found the right path, which was to make a lateral move to president of the company. And I went on and became COO of Breckenridge. And when we got into the business, it was doing, I can't give you specifics, but we grew business in the last 3 years by over 220% on a really low base. On a really medium high base for what a craft spirits business is. We grew it from the 14th largest to the 9th largest ultra premium whiskey brand in the US. So that's anything above $29, essentially. Expanded distribution into 12 new states and 9 countries globally, and expanded the personnel from essentially 22 people to about 105. So we added a restaurant, a bar, added 30,000 square feet of production capacity, expanded from 1 still to 3 stills, and increased the amount of barrels that we could make by roughly 16x. So did that all in 3 years. And honestly, Facebook threw a picture at me the other day of like, this was you 4 years ago. And I was like, no, that had to be 10 years ago. And it's crazy to think about like everything that's happened in that short amount of time. So that was maybe 5 minutes, but that's essential. Oh, and then Pioneer. So about 6 to 9 months ago, the universe just starts throwing things in your path. And the biggest thing that it was throwing at me was cannabis. And I'm not and never have been an avid smoker. I'll just go ahead and say that. Most of my friends here were very avid. So I've certainly been around it and know consumption patterns. But, as I was starting to talk to some people in the industry and seeing the opportunities that were out there, it was mind-blowing to me how similar the category is to that of spirits or wine or beer, for example. It just felt really, really familiar. And the category right now is in a really interesting state where, the first wave of entrepreneurs were the first guys in, and they've sort of taken the business to where it is today. And we see a huge opportunity to take it to the next level. So with that, after a lot of due diligence and excitement, put together a business that is now acquiring the 3rd largest grow facility in Colorado. We're going to be buying 4 dispensaries within the first year and a half, and then developing a whole lot of brands, both in the CBD and cannabis space. And really our goal, as Scott put it, is to really grow from the 3rd to 2nd or 1st largest grower in the state, and then build out the business from there nationally. So I resigned Breckenridge Distillery last week, and am now the CEO of Pioneer Interests. So that gets you up to today. We're raising a $15 million round, and we're about 5.2 in so far, with a little bit to go. So, yeah.
Nice. Well, when you walked in and said that you've worked sex, tech,
drugs, rock and roll.
Rock and roll, you weren't lying.
I was
so
not lying.
There's a lot to go off
Totally.
of here.
Sin brands, it seems to be my niche.
No, it's a good places to be. But I guess my first question just in response to that is, at each place you seem to have hit that ceiling and wanted to see what you could do more. And so how can people in here know when they've hit that ceiling and when they might need to try something else or expand or something like that?
That's a really good question. I think that is for each person to really determine on their own. And it's hard. I think that with every business that I've run now, from Billy Boy all the way to getting to Pioneer, you start with wanting to do everything and proving it to everybody else that like, I can do it, I've got this. Like, yeah, I want advice, but trust me, I've got this. And with every business, I found myself opening up more and more and more. And whether it's an insecurity or whether it's just more experience possibly, I think you reach this point where you realize like this is a team sport, right? Business in general. And you need to realize what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are within that team. And you also reach a point where you're saying, hey, this is the position I'm playing today, but I know I have this ambition that I can do that, right? And I think that in terms of what ultimately helps you make that decision is to each their own, right? I left New York from Billy Boy and decided to move back to Colorado to start Utivity. And the analogy that I use there is I could have stayed in New York for 2 more years, or I could have left 2 years earlier, right? You're never gonna find that exact moment when you feel it's the right moment to make that move. But I think that that, look, I'm starting to get frustrated with where I'm at and what I'm trying to do. And I know that I can do more, right? And so I think it's going with that instinct to say, okay, this is what I'm good at. I've accomplished that. Now I want to go pursue this new opportunity because I'm going to be able to learn more and do more and apply the skills that I've learned in a larger way.
Yeah, to have that confidence in yourself.
Absolutely right.
Nice.
I'm really curious, especially given the fundraising that you're doing now, about the challenges with growing a business within the regulatory environment that you are, especially given like Sessions' actions recently and what you think the future looks like.
Yeah, that's a phenomenal question, and I could go on for like literally a half an hour on that. So in terms of the regulatory environment, there's no doubt that this is a riskier category, and what I would say is that it's all about beta, right? So higher risk, higher return, and that is most certainly the case in terms of cannabis. When I was looking at spirit businesses, they were really attractive because they had limited capex. So, for those business majors in here, you get that. But for those of you that aren't, capex is property, plant, and equipment, right? So once you build once you build a facility and everything, that still just pumps off juice every single day. You barrel it, it's worth 3x what you put into it, right? And so you have limited investment that's necessary and really high profitability. When a spirits business reaches maturity, it does about 25 to 30% EBITDA, which is phenomenal, right? When we're looking at cannabis businesses, at minimum, in their infancy, they're doing like 42 to 45% EBITDA, right? And so our ability to then optimize and scale, it really means that we could probably get it up close to 50%. Now, on the cultivation business, there's limited taxation. On the retail business, it's a nightmare. But what we're positioning is saying, like, look, first off, we're already going to take a discount relative to how we would raise money for a spirits brand, which is traditionally at higher multiples. In the case of cannabis, we've taken a 50% discount, right? So if I'm saying, hey, in spirits, companies are selling for, anywhere from 8 to 12 times revenue, which is crazy, we are discounting that by 50% and saying, hey, we're just going to go for 3 times revenue at this point, right? And that's because of the legal nature of the business. Now, the long-term upside, it's great from an investment perspective because you're starting here, and then I'm going to take you here very, very quickly, right? In terms of Sessions and just broad macro view on the category, 64% of Americans, both Republican and Democratic, believe that cannabis should be legalized recreationally nationally, right? So the last kind of political issues that were similar to cannabis in that respect was gay marriage was a big one, civil rights women's suffrage, and the list goes on and on and on. And, it's really hard for politicians to go against their constituency in that respect. In a way, it's a lose-lose situation for them. Furthermore, it's a loss when they see the job creation and tax revenue that's generated from the category. Colorado, for example, has already generated $1 billion in tax revenue since 2016 on cannabis alone. That's massive. 2014? 2014. 2014. Still, that's even still a massive number at that point. So, Cory Gardner, who many of you may know as sort of the most staunch Republican senator of Colorado, he represents Pueblo and sort of the Southern District. He said, I am going to hold up every DOJ nomination for any new judges until Sessions holds up to what he told me prior to his confirmation hearing. So, the combination of politicians getting really behind the category because they see the job growth, the taxation opportunities, then, with public opinion being where it is, we feel it's only a matter of time, probably within 2 to 4 years, that we'll have national, federal, medical, legal cannabis. And then, in terms of recreational, that I think is going to be a state-by-state issue. So, but it is, there's no doubt it is harder, but, what I've learned a lot in raising money now a few different times is you have a full spectrum of possible investors. You have people that, I think I'm a risky investor. I have friends that are outrageously risky. Their beta tolerance is off the charts. And I have friends that are outrageously conservative, and everybody in the middle, right? So, it's really just finding your niche of what is the type of investor that really wants to get into this.
Nice.
Yeah.
Going off finding your niche. So with Breckenridge, obviously Breckenridge is a big city that everybody knows in Colorado, and weed, cannabis is something that also Coloradans are pretty familiar with. How do you, in all of your businesses, kind of play off that Colorado loyalty?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we all came to Colorado or we're at DU for some reason or another, right? Whether it's the lifestyle, the people. Colorado's been home to me since, I was 2 years old, and grew up in the state, always wanted to come back. Every time I had to leave, essentially, it just drew me back in. And so, I'm incredibly proud of the state and what we've done. And it's just it's a cool combination of people, whether you're a farmer or a oil and gas guy, if you're in finance or tech. There's just, spirits or beer or wine. It's such a diverse economy in general, and such diverse people as a result of that. It's hard not to be proud of this state, and what I think I really found years ago, having lived in New York, is just Colorado is where I want to be, and so it's very then easy to go ahead and sort of raise that banner up and say, hey, let's support Colorado in that sense. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, definitely.
Cool.
Definitely. For students here who might want to be opening their own businesses and then growing them, you've come into a lot of different businesses and allowed them to grow. So as students, we might not have the same resources as these companies already do. Mm-hmm. What can somebody who's trying to get their student business off the ground do for growth?
Well, first off, for anybody that's interested in starting their business, I think they need to realize, and everybody says this, so I'll say it, but I'll sort of caveat it. You need to realize how hard you need to work. And I think what people forget is they're like, yeah, well, I work hard. It's more about you just always have to do more. If you think about like, oh, I need to send that email to that person, I can do it tomorrow, right? No, send it right now, right? The time, the energy, I could possibly get this sales account with just what I've given them, right? Or I could provide them with more information, but it requires me to develop that work. Do it. Do the work, right? Do everything you can possibly do to secure a sale, secure an investor, build your business up in any way that you can, because people underestimate how much goes into this. That is first and foremost, is just having that sort of understanding that you need to work harder than the average bear, right? The second thing in terms of growth is just really, I think, keeping the horizon in mind, but also setting up those short-term goals, right? We always hear after New Year's Eve, like the best way to keep a New Year's resolution is to set up smaller goals, right? That is even true in business. If you're like, hey, I want to build my business up to $1 million in revenue, okay, that could be achievable, absolutely, but it's going to be easier for you to get to 100,000 and then 200,000 and 500,000 and 800 and a million. And by the time you get to a million, you know, it feels so much greater because you've been hitting all these short-term goals in between. So it's important to, you know, one, I think, understand the work that you have to put into it, and also setting up attainable short-term goals, as well as the long-term goal of, hey, I want to get to $1 million.
Yeah. In your experience, has there ever been a short-term goal that you've struggled reaching, and how did you overcome that in any of the businesses?
Yeah, I think short-term, long-term goal for me, just on a personal side, is probably balance. You know, I'm like 20 pounds heavier than I was, and you know, haven't skied nearly as much as I want to. We haven't gone camping in like 2 years. So I think, you know, personal short-term balance, need to work on that a little bit harder. I think that, you know, short-term goal, I've got a great one. Under-promising, over-delivering is a huge one. So, you know, I clearly am a bit of a sales guy, right? Like, I can, you know, sell ice to an Eskimo. But, you know, in that, there's a balance between, in managing a startup in particular, where you have to promise the dream to people, right? But you also have to sell what I would say is sort of the attainable dream, because if you oversell, you're under-promising and under-delivering, or over-promising, under-delivering, and as a result of that, your investors, your business partners, your board are constantly going to be disappointed in you. And even if you're like, hey, I grew the business by X%, it's like, yeah, but you didn't hit your goal, you know? And that's a really important lesson to learn, because in school we get partial credit, right? And that partial credit can, you know, give you the satisfaction of like, okay, well, you know, I didn't fully get there, but I got there. And in business, you need to understand that it's real people that you're dealing with, it's real money that you're dealing with, and so you absolutely have to hit those goals that you can attain. Apple is a perfect example of that. They always were like, yeah, we think 50 cents earnings per share, right? And in the end, they always did like $1.50, and they were like, "Oops," you know. And, but investors love that, right? And they're like, "Woo, this is awesome." So, you know, I think having that same mentality, where you got to balance it, is making it a sort of sexy enough dream for people to get on board with, you know. And that is a short-term goal that you know, I wouldn't say I necessarily struggle with, but it's always difficult to balance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And going to the point of balance, you're still president of Utivity. You still have stock in Breckenridge Distillery. How are you going to balance all of that with your new position?
Totally. Well, I learned very quickly with Utivity that, you know, I tried to do two things at once, and it wasn't so much about disappointing my business partners or our investors. It was more disappointing myself, right? Because I think we all have ambitions and, you know, a drive, right? Otherwise, most of you wouldn't be sitting in this room. And, you know, you have expectations for yourself. And at that point, I wasn't meeting the expectations of what I set out for. And, you know, what I learned with Breckenridge and Pioneer in particular after that experience with Utivity is, do not try to do two things at once, right? So at this point, you know, my role in Utivity is still active, you know, but it's, even when through the Breckenridge transition, it was more in a sort of consulting capacity at that point. And things have continued to go really well. For Breckenridge, it's more of like, I needed to have that clean break and be able to say, you know, to my mentor, Martin, and to our investors, like, guys, you know, I have this new opportunity. I'm ready to pursue it. I've given you everything that I've got for the last 3 years or so. And you know, it's the next evolution at this point. And they were more than thrilled. You know, it was a very clean transition. And at that point, it was also, you know, I'm available to them, right? I have a vested interest. So I think now, about balance, it's realizing that you got to focus on your life and you got to focus on your work, and it's very hard to spread yourself thin. Some people can do it, and I have one friend who is in 12 different pots at once, and God bless him, but a lot of us don't have that capacity. And you know, so for me, the dedication is full towards Pioneer and life, I would say, you know.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right, I have one more fun question, then I'll open it up to everybody. But I know that Breckenridge Distillery hosts the ski shot.
World's longest shot ski.
World's longest shot ski in the Uller Festival.
That's right.
In Breckenridge. So, are there any future plans to beat records even bigger than that, or with Pioneer? Are you thinking a cannabis record?
Interesting. Yeah. Haven't thought of that yet, but I love that idea. So the shot ski, for those of you that don't know, Breck started years ago the world's longest shot ski. So we'll screw skis, old skis, end to end with a bolt and screw. Put 4 shots on the ski, pour them all, and then all at once everybody goes ahead and pulls the shot. For those of you that are in college, you know what a shot ski is. Well, that's where I learned how to do a shot ski. I don't know about you, Nina. Funny enough, there was a brewery in Park City that decided to compete against us, right? And we were like, okay. So I think we were at 650 skis 2 years ago, and then they ramped it up to 950, and they were like, yeah, we blew it out of the water. We were like, cute. So I think we did 1,400 the year after that, right? And now it takes up the entire Main Street. And this year, we called the brewery and we said, let's make this a friendly competition, right? No need to blow it out, otherwise we're going to be up to 20,000 people within a couple of years. And they were like, cool. So now it's just kind of small incrementalism. But what we do, the coolest thing this year is we ran out of space on Main Street, right? So we decided that we had to loop back on Main Street. And if you think about it, if you're taking a shot this way and that side is taking a shot that way, well, how does the physics of that work? You need the shot to do this. So we actually engineered a really incredible device that allows for people to take the shot skis on either side. Brilliant. So this year, we blew the record out. I grew up in Aspen, Colorado, really awesome place. So we always would make fun. I'd be like, Aspen's a real ski town and Breckenridge is just cute. And they'd be like, no, Breckenridge is a real ski town. You live in, Vail. And so the one thing that I will say that Breck blows the rest of the world away is Winter Carnival Ullerfest. If you haven't been up there, you gotta go. Eat at the restaurant at Breckenridge Distillery, it's amazing. In terms of new records that I think Breckenridge is trying to pursue, really we are trying to grow into the 5th largest ultra premium sphere brand in the US. So that would put us in line with Angel's Envy, Four Roses, Basil Hayden, few of those ultra premium brands, and really just continue to grow the business. And at Pioneer, I think we're, why not? We'll go for that number 1 spot and number 1 cultivator and retailer in the state, and give me 10 years to do it.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. Maybe a record thrown in there somewhere.
Yeah, a record in there. Right. Fair enough.
Mm-hmm. What kind of role do stunts like that play in your strategy for marketing and growth?
Totally. So the thing that I've learned is PR is the most valuable marketing asset that you can generate. You can pay for Facebook advertisements or Instagram, YouTube. You can pay for billboards and print ads. The reality is that we all still read magazines and publications, and we're on the web. And the only way to get those eyes, those organic impressions, is via PR, right? So stunts like that really, really, really help. We also try to collaborate and do a ton of really exciting things at Breckenridge, like partner with David Burke, who's a world-renowned chef. We do a national punch competition where bartenders from every city in 15 cities get together and compete to make a punch, and then we bring them out to Food and Wine to compete at the finals, right? So we do things like that sort of tailor to your target audience, which is either, in the punch and David Burke segment, it's Food and Wine, right? For the shot ski, it's lifestyle and travel, right? And I think it's finding those opportunities where you have a unique voice and that pairs with the target consumer that you're going after. And those impressions, that high value impression that you're getting from PR is worth its weight in gold.
To that point, what is one PR activity or event that you wish you would have been the top?
Oh, wow. What was a good one? A few advertisement campaigns that I think are killing it right now. Bud Light's Dilly Dilly. I mean, I was at a wedding and the father of the bride was like, Dilly Dilly, in New York City. And I was like, you gotta be kidding me. I wouldn't have taken you to drink Bud Light, but okay. That's one. What was the other killer PR campaign that we saw recently? I'm going to have to come back to that. I mean, it's such a good question because, yeah, I'm going to have to come back, but it's going to hit me. I'm sorry. It's a killer question. What else you guys got?
So for someone like who hasn't studied business or that's not in finance, like what would you recommend their path be in terms of getting started with business? Because I hear a lot of you need to go work for someone for a couple of years and then start your business. So I'm trying to figure out like what's the best route, especially hearing you making transitions from employment to very high positions at several different companies.
Yeah, that's a good question. In today's age, it seems like everybody thinks they can start a business, right? And I think that I would caution that, right? Because something that even some of my contemporaries or mentors have said to me is like, listen, we essentially threw you into the deep end real quick. And normally somebody in your position would have had 20 years of corporate experience where they can just learn the processes and procedures and skills necessary for communication and whatever it is before you go ahead and go out and do it yourself. But at the same time, I take solace in the fact that there are individuals that started businesses without even graduating college, and there's those that have started businesses when they were 65 years old. Guy at Kentucky Fried Chicken, I don't know if you guys saw that video, but like 75 years old, he started KFC. Like, I love that, and he was poor beforehand. I mean, destitute, really. So, I think that, look, if you have an idea that you're passionate about and you think that you can pursue and you've got a unique and differentiated angle on other aspects of competition, then go for it, pursue it, and I'll support you in that, right? What I would say is taking a corporate job, or not even corporate, I mean, internships, mentorships, working, right now you're in a sponge-like point in your life. You are just gonna absorb and learn so much every single day, and you're gonna mimic it, right? And you're gonna sort of put your own twist on it. And that is sort of important, depending on my dad was a business guy, right? So I was sort of absorbing business at a younger age, and when I was here, I was reading the New York Times every day and reading The Economist and Wired, and I had a desire to learn more of that. I had certain a level of confidence that I was like, I can do this. I have a good mind for marketing, but I had internships all through college. Like, I worked for Red Bull in terms of marketing, experiential marketing all through college. Like, I started working in a ranch when I was 11 years old, shoveling shit all day. I worked as a busboy, then a expo, then a waiter. Like, I worked. And I think that develops two things: work ethic, number one, and I think that it also really develops an understanding of just how businesses operate, and mostly that's about people, like how they interact, how they engage with one another. And you want to know the hardest thing in business? It's managing people. Like, absolutely true. It is crazy, the shit that I've seen. But what I would say is, look, if you have a dream and a desire to pursue it, absolutely pursue it. But if you haven't sort of the foundation of, say, a business degree, or having worked in a lot of different companies, or seen how people do it, I would urge you to take those internships, take those opportunities, find mentors, like shadow people. It doesn't mean that you need to work 25 years in a career before you can take the plunge. You may be quick enough to learn it in 3 months. You may be quick enough to learn it in 2 weeks. Everybody's a little bit different, right? But I would highly recommend the mentorship or education.
Great. Yeah. Any other questions right now?
Who have your mentors been?
Wow, yeah. I go in different angles for mentors, right? I'm not a traditionalist in terms of mentorship. A lot of my friends have like a daily or weekly call or monthly or whatever with other people, and I just haven't developed that, and I think it's a regret of mine, and something that I am constantly trying to work on, and particularly with Pioneer now, I think I'm positioned to do that more, My mentors, though, first and foremost was, I think, my dad and my mom. So my dad and my mom split when I was like 2 years old. And my dad was an entrepreneur, had a very successful business, and my mom went and was a photojournalist and then worked retail and then eventually owned a yoga studio, you know? So two very hardworking people, but one from the bottom and one from, you know, sort of the top. And I think those are my two first and foremost mentors. From a work perspective, Martin Franklin, by far, you know, he was the first one to give me my shot. I'm constantly trying to now build a platform, right? Martin bought all these different businesses and packaged them together and leveraged the synergies and grew them out. And I have both a micro and macro vision, and I want to achieve that. So he's definitely my main one. Harry Truman is like a random one, because any time that I think, I have a friend of mine who at 30 years old, you know, with just his mind is now worth over $250 million. Made partner at a hedge fund when he was 26 years old, right? And there are days when I wake up and I'm like, damn it, you know, I don't have that. I don't have anything near that. And I think that where I get inspiration from Harry Truman is he really like had this up and down career in his life, and you know, really didn't start hitting it until he was 55, 60 years old. I think it was actually like 62 years old. And then very quickly, you know, through a lot of experience, through a lot of success and failure, he ultimately became president at like a critical time in our nation's history and shaped the world that we live in today from an international policy perspective, for better or worse, right? So I think he's a mentor. You know, musicians, athletes, I think the military, I take a lot of, I wouldn't necessarily call it mentorship, but I think inspiration from that. I like how teams work in the military. I think if you want to read a great book, General McStanley, Team of Teams is a really great book. He came into the military in Afghanistan when everything was all over the place. There was turf wars between the CIA and special forces and the military, and he came in and streamlined and essentially took an entrepreneurial approach to how we manage the military and created what's known as teams of teams. And so I think that he's a really cool inspiration or mentor in that sense. And then just friends, you know, like my friends are my family, always have been. And whether it's they work in finance or private equity or entrepreneurs or accounting or finance, you know, I'm constantly calling them up. Just this morning, you know, I called a good friend of mine and I was like, this is how I'm structuring this, what do you think? And he's like, yeah, no, and do it this way. And I was like, great, awesome, thank you. So I think go for mentorship or inspiration where you can find it.
Awesome. Mm-hmm.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks.
Craft beer and spirits is a very, very crowded marketplace in Colorado.
Super saturated, yeah.
Marijuana is getting increasingly crowded.
Totally.
Is there a difference for you approaching, you know, a saturated market like that, finding a way to stand out versus just finding a unique product or service?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, it has to start with that unique product or service, right? So craft whiskey, while it was a somewhat saturated space, it was a saturated space. It is an ever more saturated space. But when we looked at Breckenridge, it was one of the most highly awarded craft bourbons in the space, and just simply because it was better juice than a lot of other brands. I think with our cannabis project, we're acquiring a facility, a business that has a proprietary growth method that achieves 3 pounds per light. So, you know, 1 light, you get 3 pounds. The industry average is anywhere from 1.5 to 2 pounds, right? So that is a unique and differentiating factor. I think you have to be able to hang your hat on one of those things, right? It's either, and that could be culture, that could be brand or marketing positioning, it could be manufacturing or product quality, whatever those things are, but you have to have, I think, a point of differentiation. From there, in terms of how you stand out, that it depends on the category, right? If in spirits, you know, we took the approach of we need to combine our, and actually I think we took the same approach at Billy Boy as well. You have to combine how to tell your story, your culture, your identity of who you are as a brand and as a business, and translate that along with the quality of the product to the consumer. With Billy Boy, our condoms were made in Germany, right? So I was like, okay, we're the Mercedes of condoms, but we're also like a fun and cheeky brand. So how do we make fun with quality, and we came up with the tagline, do it better, right? So like kind of fun, kind of cheeky, but also tying with that premiumization. With Breckenridge, we came up with the tagline, elevate your spirits, right? Or elevate your spirit. So, elevation, size, quality, premiumization, and like altitude, right? So you can take that in so many different ways. Like I'm high on life to I'm physically high to my spirits are high, right? So I think that has been an award-winning sort of playbook of combining the quality or differentiation of your product along with your culture or identity and finding the right way to communicate that. Yeah.
Great. Any other audience questions? Oh, yeah, you go.
So in marketing today, in this politically divisive climate we have, you're hearing a lot about companies needing to take a stand politically
Yeah.
and also CSR, corporate social responsibility campaigns in order to
Patagonia.
yeah. That's a good
Actually,
example.
Miss, to go back to your question, Patagonia,
Okay.
PR. But that's more, I think, like, I'm sorry to cut
No,
you off.
I'm just wondering how important do you really think those elements are, especially now that you're working with kind of a startup, and is Pioneer named after, is that homage to DU?
A little bit. I've always said when people are like, "Oh, where'd you go to school?" I'm like, "DU, go Pios." Like, I mean, that's always my plug. Yeah, I mean, I love the pioneer culture. I love this idea that like whether you're the first in or just early in, you're taking a shot, you're taking a risk. Like you're uprooting your whole life and your family and what is safe to you, and you're going and pursuing something that is risky and but has could have a really big payout or not. Like I'm confident at this point in my career that look, I can get a job. I can. Mark Cuban is a great inspiration in that. He's like, look, I don't know if I could ever become a billionaire again, right? But I could most certainly become a millionaire again because I just know how to sell, right? For me, I feel like, look, I will find success because I can sell. I have great experience. My skills are transferable no matter where I go. I think that to your question of like cause marketing or taking a stance. My broad thesis on that is if you're somebody like Apple or Samsung or Google or Amazon, right, GE, Coca-Cola, you can take a stance, but it is super risky. And at that point, you actually have more to lose than I think necessarily you have to gain. But I also think that some of those companies have a responsibility in some ways because they are influencers. They're thought leaders in our economy, in our environment. They pay sometimes for lobbyists or pay for votes. So, that is sort of the nature of our democracy right now. I think that for smaller companies, I think you have less to lose at that point. So I do think that it's useful to take a position because one aspect of PR that I sort of failed to mention but firmly believe in is what is it? All news is good news, right? So yeah, in that, hey, if you're pissing somebody off, at least they're hearing about you, and checking it out and listening. I also think that on a personal standpoint, I don't know if there's necessarily a separation between church and state, but I also think that if you impact your world or your environment or our democracy in some way, then you should take a position. At Breckenridge, we in craft spirits consume a lot of energy and we consume a lot of water, right? Whether it's from the grain to the bottle, there's a ton of water that goes into that process. So at Breckenridge, we actually implemented a new sanitation system that after the wash and the mash, meaning like once we essentially ferment, we take all of that water and we run it through a really intensive sanitation process, and we essentially reclaim 75% of the water that we did from the previous mash. Which is awesome. Now, we're still in testing right now, so please don't quote me on those statistics, and I don't stand behind those and blah, blah, blah. It could be 50%, it could be 75 or 100. We don't know just yet. But like for us, we are at Breckenridge behind cause marketing when it comes to saving our winters and water resource, because that is the next huge issue that we will inevitably fight wars over, right? And so while we might not necessarily be taking a stance between Hillary or Trump, we are certainly taking a stance of like, this is our world, this is our environment, and we believe in this cause. If that somewhat answers your question.
And it sounds like you guys are putting your money where your mouth is.
Absolutely right, yeah.
Takes it to the next level as well.
It does. And I will also tell you that I think that business from a a conservation perspective, it's in everybody's best interest to be more conservative with energy. Like, it's just cost effective, right? So there's no reason why you can't switch all your fluorescents out for LEDs. There's no reason why you guys can't recycle. There's no reason why you can't add incremental measurements to improve your overall processes and make a less of an impact on our environment. So that's an easy one to me. I think that if you're like Apple and privacy, right? Like, Apple deals a lot with privacy, and I think most of the tech businesses do. In my opinion, if I was running one of those tech businesses, I would have to take a stance on that because it's a part of my business, and Tim Cook did, right? I mean, he didn't unlock the Apple iPhone of the shooter in San Bernardino. Thank you very much. I was thinking Pasadena. I'm like, no. So you know, that is to me taking a stance on an issue that is impacting your business. And
Relevant to that.
correct. Yeah, I think for businesses that want to stand up and you know, say, hey, we support this party. I don't know, because I think you alienate some. We are all like this. This country is split decisively, right, between Dems and Republicans, conservatives, liberals, and so forth, and everybody in the middle, right? And I don't think that business should alienate. I think it should be more inclusive. I mean, that's the nature of a capitalist market economy.
How much did your partnership, Breckenridge Distillery's partnership with Frontier Airlines impact their national growth?
Great question. I think really beneficially. That so for those of you that don't know, we have the vodka, gin, and bourbon on all Frontier Airlines. That is essentially a marketing. You know, it increased revenue as well as got us in front of 3.2 million passengers per year. And you know, I can't tell you how many times I get text messages from people being like, "Drinking your booze on Frontier." I'm like, "Great, order more, buy for the whole plane." You know, I really think that helped us, particularly within Frontier's hub markets. So places like Chicago, Florida, Nevada, Colorado, those are sort of the main routes that Frontier flies. And in those markets, we have seen the most growth in those. Florida grew by over 250% last year for us. Illinois grew at 50%, and it's our second largest market. Nevada is growing substantially. Now, there's other contributing factors to what is causing the growth in those markets, whether it's new brokers, sales reps, whatever it might be. But yeah, I think that from a national awareness perspective, it has absolutely contributed substantially to the business. But it comes at a cost, you know.
Was there ever a caution of partnering with Frontier not being a top tier airline?
That's a great question. No, I was not in the room when the decision was made. It was actually prior to us coming on and acquiring the business. So I don't know if that necessarily came up, but I would say probably not is my guess, because at the end of the day, we saw it as like it's sales, right? So it's top line growth. It's 3.2 million passengers, and you know, we're going to make a little bit of money or lose a little bit of money, but there's overall benefit to that. I think that when you look at United and Delta and those partnerships cost a lot more money. Those guys do not make money on those deals, right? But it's a great advertisement. It's a lockout is the main thing. Craft House is another good brand. Like if you fly United, you may have seen the Moscow Mule. That has really helped them kind of gain a little bit more national awareness. And you know, they were, because of relationships, and they're based in Chicago, they were able to get that relationship. But I don't think that would have impacted our decision. Yeah, I do, you know, worry, talking about, again, cause marketing a little bit, is Frontier's issue with their pilots and their flight attendants, you know, union issues, essentially. And that's ongoing in the airline industry in general. But, you know, I don't know if that would necessarily impact our decision either, right?
Great. Any other audience questions?
Now, regarding national growth, I know some friends locally that kind of think of Breckenridge Brewery and Breckenridge Distillery as one of the same. And as Breckenridge Brewery expands nationwide, are you able to kind of piggyback up off of that kind of brand name of just Breckenridge at all?
Totally. So one of the biggest contributors to Breckenridge's growth in the first place is the fact that it's based in one of the most visited ski towns in America, right? Or in North America, for that matter. I mean, it's Vail, Breckenridge, and Whistler that are constantly trading off for the 1 through 3 spots, right? So, and the number one visitor to Breckenridge comes from Chicago, and the number 2 comes from Houston, and the number 3 comes from Dallas, and the 4th comes from Miami, and so forth. So, number one, Breckenridge has a great brand name because a lot of people know the town of Breckenridge, right? So that helps. And yeah, as people start to see Breckenridge brew products in more markets, I think there creates sort of this resonance or name. And I think, whether people think, oh, maybe this is the same product, I love Breckenridge IPA, I'm going to give this bourbon a shot, hey, we'll take that. But I think there is definitely a sort of shared effect of our success versus their success. One of the things that's actually backlash to us, though, is Breckenridge Brewery sold, it was, I think like May or June of last year to AB InBev, right? And AB is just going on an acquisition tear of the craft brew space right now. And, people look at that and say, oh, Breck Brew sold out, and they sold out to the big guys. And so amongst religious craft consumers, they're like, well, now they're not making the beer, AB InBev's making the beer. And so that is, when people say, oh, Breckenridge Brewery, you guys affiliated with them, we're like, no, we're not. And mainly because of that perception versus more of our internal homegrown, mentality.
All right, to stay on top of some of the political issues we've been talking about in industry, makeup, what are some of the daily things that you do and that we can do to kind of stay in the know and make decisions off of that?
Interesting. So, I think, look, being well informed is critical. When I was here, like I said, I've never been a big book reader, although I'm now changing that aggressively. So I highly recommend everybody reads a lot. But I did always, every day I read the New York Times here, and I tried to read it's hard to read the whole Economist every single week, Jesus. But now I've gotten okay, I'm reading North America, I'm reading Europe and Asia, and I'll skip Africa this week and I'll get to it next week. And but I think that what I like to do to try to stay involved is, number one, I set up a lot of Google alerts for issues or topics that I'm interested in keeping aligned on. I try to subscribe to as much industry-related news as possible, but not necessarily inundating myself, right? Don't go today and suddenly sign up for 150 different news alerts because you end up reading none of them, right? Choose a few curated favorites that you really like that you're actually going to go ahead and read. And you might not read it every single day, but you should spend at least 2 or 3 times a week where you're just glancing through, choosing a few key issues, and just educating yourself on topics that you might not necessarily find interesting, but you got to be sort of knowledgeable on, right? I think that what I've really started doing over the course of the last year was I started reading more management books. And I think the reason for that is because, we talk about reaching the ceiling. We always are going to improve. We're always going to become better individuals or better workers in whatever it is that we do. And you got to source, advice or direction in as many places as you can. So, I read Richard Branson's book, I read Bezos' book, I read General McStanley's, I read autobiographies like, how did Einstein do it, right? How did people that were thought leaders or innovators or, perpetuators of our society, what were the challenges that they encountered and how did they overcome it? And what were sort of their, approaches to solving a problem? Because that's what business and life is just a sequence of problem solving, right? And so, now I'm trying to do a lot more of that and just realizing oh, cool, I manage this way, but maybe I should try and incorporate this. And I've started doing that and it's awesome, right? Because you either find oh, this is a tried and true method for kind of doing something in particular, but now I can add this to it and, and improve upon it, right? So yeah, and then in terms of politics, I love Countable. If you guys are familiar with that app, check it out. It's awesome. It's just what your congressman, senator, are constantly voting on and the issues that are hitting. And you can also live vote. So, whether it's, do you agree with this issue or disagree? And you can see, sort of public opinion on a ongoing basis.
Nice.
Yeah.
And going off of managing people and leading people, you said that's one of the hardest things in business.
For
I'm
sure.
interested in connecting that with being worldly. How is your international experience? I'm sorry I creeped on you, as you probably saw on LinkedIn. I know you studied abroad in Shanghai.
Yep.
And then the condom brand was German. How has all of that experience gone to make you a better leader who can bring in that worldly knowledge and diversity?
Yeah, I think the coolest thing is realizing that different cultures do business in different ways. So in addition to, I Charrington scholars in here, I hope. Yeah, good. So I studied abroad in Shanghai, and then convinced my dad, shockingly. I was actually sort of freaked out that I was supposed to graduate early. Nobody gave me the memo that we could take several quarters here where you only had to like take 3 classes. So I was taking 5 or 4 classes every single quarter, and I met with my advisor, and they were like, yeah, you're on track to graduate early. And I'm like, that's not happening. So I convinced my dad to let me go travel after Shanghai, and I went to Tibet, Nepal, India, Thailand, Cambodia, and traveled around solo backpacking for a few months. And travel is a huge thing for me. I love it because you just get to see how different cultures interact and communicate with one another, how people, how people do commerce on a regular basis and how that's different from our culture, and applying that same, that same viewpoint to how we do things here in America, right? And finding different ways that you can sort of look at a problem in that sense. And I think that working, if any of you get a chance to work with an international business or with international partners, it's very challenging, right? Europeans, I was just laughing with a friend of mine, he worked at Bosch for a really long time, and we were laughing about how much vacation time they take, right? And how many company paid holidays they take, and they're, not necessarily, I wouldn't call it work ethic, but just work-life balance, and how different that is to the US, but at the same time, like, well, I'm kind of envious, I think in China, when somebody says you've got a deal, that does not mean you have a deal at all. Even when you have a piece of paper in place, you still don't have a deal. I just think learning some of those things and applying it to how you do business or live or interact with people on a regular basis, it can be very, very useful. So I highly encourage people to travel as much as they can. And that can even just be to a different state, to a different place, interact with people that are different from you as often as you can.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah.
Before I take over too much, yeah?
We have one more. Time for one more.
Oh,
question.
time for one more question. All right.
Bummer.
Well, I guess just advice for college students in general about how they can move forward in the business world, how they can stand out, resources they can take care of now at the university level. Last thoughts to students.
Yeah, last thoughts to students. I mean, I think be excited. You're coming in at a really interesting time in our world politics, in our economy right now, in terms of globalization. I think the fact that all of you are going to have a college degree is critical. I think that, the main thing that I would take away from this place is realize that this is your foundation, right? People, they aren't going to care if you went to DU versus Harvard. Really, it's what did you learn here and how are you going to take those lessons and carry it through? I kept a lot of my finance notebooks for years and still would glance through them every so often. And I still use a lot of those financial calculations or variables on a regular basis, right? And I think one thing that I would really take away from this place is your network as well, is the relationships that you've developed and cultivated here, whether those are friendships that you're going to carry on, if those are business relationships that you're going to carry on. I think reach out to people and engage with them and interact. One of my best friends from DU, so much better at this than I am, but he calls everybody that we know on a regular basis, and he knows what they're doing, but he also learns so much from that. And I think that the more that you can just continue to maintain your thirst for knowledge and excitement, you absolutely should, because you can't take knowledge away. It's permanently transferable. And so just continue to pursue that. And I think also leverage resources that DU has. My girlfriend is getting her MBA here right now. And she's constantly leveraging the network and the relationships and the resources that DU has. She even had a question for me for the other day, and I was like, you should go to the Writing Center, and like those are tools or resources that you will be able to use and continue using after your experience here at DU, right? And use the gym because it's great. So I think that's it.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Really appreciate it, everybody. My email address is on the board. If any of you want to shoot me a question or have any questions or follow-ups, feel free to reach out to me. And thank you. Good luck.